we learned a little lesson from how this class is going to end. We have 2 more recording sessions. We're going to finish Maslow today, I hope, and then go on to Kohlberg. And we might even go on to Kohlberg a little today. One thing that we learned from Piaget is that thinking is not linear, right? And you know that yourself. All of a sudden you hear something, you say, oh, that's what that meant, something you heard 5 years ago or 5 weeks ago. Okay? So we're going to do that, and then we're going to go back and finish Kohlberg. But I know we're not linear thinker. I'll be able to put it together, and everything will be okay. Okay, I want to say something else, by the way. There's something called serendipity. Serendipity means something you just bump into by chance. Okay, the last time that we talked, and the last class when Lee was here, and I sort of came in. By the way, Lee really, you can tell from experience, Lee really has a very good notion of how to apply humanistic thinking to pro-child thinking, pro-creative ideals thinking in the classroom. A lot better than I would like to say that when I was teaching full-time 30-something years ago, I could do it too, but he's been doing it until very recently. And I don't know about how people took it, but he and I had fun. And it worked together okay, and that wasn't planned. So on the way back, actually he was going to defense and I had to go check something out. But afterwards he came to my office and we talked about maybe, teaching the summer and until he graduates, maybe another year, teaching a bunch of stuff together. It just hit us. It was, we had a good idea, and I think if we planned it a little better, it might be more productive. As a matter of fact, maybe it's the other way around. Maybe the spontaneous was good. So, but when you run into things like that, don't push them away because you've got something written on the paper. Go for it, right? Remember, it's more important to teach the students and to teach yourself than to teach the material. I know with a tacky test, it's a little rough, but that's something you need to think about. All right, let me just remind you. Let's go to the PowerPoint for a second here. These are the, I don't know what I did. I got to get rid of this effect that you'll notice that, right? You'll see that right when I hit something, the other one dims. I must have been playing at some point and I can't get it. But in any case, I think you can still see it. We were talking about these needs, the needs for physiological health, for safety needs, love and belongingness, esteem needs. These are what Maslow calls deprivation needs. Okay? These are needs that must be supplied by society and obviously by the person's environment, and obviously if you're the people who are important in the environment and create the social environment. And these clearly we are talking about teachers having a huge role to play in creating environments. By the way, it works the other way too, right? It's pretty discouraging to teach and the students are out there like that, right? Gets at your esteem and your kinds of things. It'll happen to you. It'll happen, right? And I want to tell you something else. Not just people, but classes have personalities. I don't know why. I went into, I told you I used to go 8 to 8:30 every morning to teach one class in a school. There was one class there, they were in the 6th grade, and the guy who had been in education for 100 years, he actually wasn't the principal. He was sort of like, he was above, he was the advisor, and he had been a principal for many, many years. And now he was just sort of, it was a private school, so he was trying to put together funding and trying to help shape the whole thing. Was like the guru of the place. When people ask me, what's this guy? I said, he's the czar, right? But there was actually a principal who ran the place, but he came to me and to other teachers, he said, this class is going to be trouble. And he was talking about the long. Sure enough, they were 6th grade, 7th. In the 8th grade, there was somebody in town. The person we had on campus, there was a new Hillel Rebbe. Hillel is a Jewish students organization on campus. And I found out that her husband was a fairly well-known concert pianist. So I went to her and I said, you think you could get him to play for the school? I figured it's a shot in the dark. The guy was playing concerts around town. Eventually they left because he got an offer to be a concert pianist on a permanent basis somewhere in, I can't remember where, but in some big music city. I think it was New York or maybe it was Los Angeles. I don't remember. And he agreed. And he even agreed to play on the dinky, on the upright piano that we had. And he agreed. And he came in, and he plays. He said, well, it's not going to be too good. His piano's not so good. He was practicing. He played a few. It was beautiful. I mean, the guy was just a phenomenal pianist. Start to play. And this grade, 5 or 6 kids from this grade start screwing around and making noises and this and that. I very rarely lose my cool. I try hard not to in class. And I said to myself, and he came, and I came, right? And I even scheduled a concert a day where I didn't have anything to do, since I wasn't anything to do at the university till about 10:30. So in case it went over, I could, I said, I have this overwhelming urge to kill one of these kids, right? I mean, I was so angry. And at that time, they were the 8th grade, and the 6th graders are sitting there looking, and they were just intrigued. The guy was just a phenomenal pianist. Fortunately, I had the brains to take the person I saw, in that case, the instructor, and I took him outside, and I said, this is not the way to do things. You better sit over here, right? I didn't tell him, because if I have to look at your face once more, we're both going to wind up in the hospital. It just so angered me. Obviously, you have to be careful what you... So, and it happens. Class have personality, and they can drive you crazy, no matter what you try. Or kids, no matter what you try. You can tell, I'm pretty good at befriending the kid that everyone else... Right? I know something. I told you I teach Sunday schools this year. When I'm teaching in the Sunday school, I'm teaching. Class I teach this kid. Everybody else, he drives crazy. I like the kid, right? But I remember one time there was a kid. This same school, I was there 8 to 8:30. I tried every trick I had. He just wasn't interested in me. Boy, it really got to me. It was an attack on my self-esteem. This is what I do the best, right? Well, not in this case, baby, right? In this case, you're getting nowhere. So you have to be careful about that with yourself, too. You need to look at yourself and where you're coming from. Freud is the one who warned us about that. Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint again. Thank you for switching. In any case, these needs all are provided by society. And the other thing you have to remember, by the way, is you're not the only one. You're not the only one. I'll tell you a story I usually reserve for Kohlberg, okay? Get esteem needs. All right, come back to me. So you'll see. Anybody see the movie Grease? Right? You saw Grease, about the guys with the black jackets and the slick back hair and in the 50s. I grew up with that, right? I'm an old guy. That's what I grew up with. So... I wasn't one of them. I was one of the nerdy guys off to the side. Everybody else to them was. And there was one guy I remember. His name was Johnny. I don't remember his last name. And he was in this gang, but he must have been, 7 inches shorter than the average kid. Right? He was one of the shortest kids in class. Always had to prove himself. And the other thing, wants to prove himself, he, a couple years before, he used to jump kids in the hall. One time he jumped me, and just on an instinct, he punched me, and I punched him back. And we both had a black eye. And that was, I think that's the only fight I ever got into in middle school or high school. And that was not good, because it looked to everybody like it was a tie. Right? And here's one of these, one of the guys who, me, just a regular guy, right, had, was at a tie with him, so it got him upset. So, and he had other experiences like this. He couldn't quite prove himself to these guys. So one day, his esteem needs, he really had a real lack of esteem. He belonged there, in this group, but he couldn't get esteem from them. One day, we were in a building, right, that had, the high school was 2 stories, and there was like a half rail where you could look down and see the second story. He leaned over the half rail and spit on Mr. Murphy. This may have been 9th grade. In my days, I think it was 9th grade, yeah. This was 9th grade. 9th grade was still in what we used to call junior high school in those days, where I came from, Western New York. Now, I got to tell you about Mr. Murphy. if I think about it, Mr. Murphy probably was 6'3" and weighed 280 pounds. He played the line for some good college, right? But we were kids, you know, still weren't full grown. When I think about Mr. Murphy, I just let my emotions take over. He's like a monster. And he was tough. We had one kid in the school who used to have horrible temper tantrums. Horrible temper tantrums. And he would do something very much against the rule, but not destructive. So we used to have these desks, you know, they lift like this, right? He used to go, I'm sick of this, and slam the desk down. And he'd take his book and throw it in the closet and walk out of the room. He never throw it at the window to break the window, right? He always did something, but if you stopped him, he could get violent. He could get violent. And the teacher it was obvious to me later the teacher wanted to leave him alone. And I remember, and you never knew what kind of a mood he was in. I remember the toughest kids in the school. We had a couple of tough kids who weren't part of these, you know, slick back guys. One of them, I remember, was scared of him. When he was nuts. One time I had to stay late to do something. I went out there in the bicycle lot, and there he's sitting. His name was Floyd. I guess it doesn't matter. So many Floyds, right? And I remember my heart sank. What kind of mood is he in? It was a bad mood. I figured I'm going to be dead. I mean, he was just so violent, especially if you tried to stop him. And he would have, in any case, and the teachers were clearly told, in any case, one day, Floyd pulls this on Mr. Murphy. I'm going to stand up, okay? Mr. Murphy cuts him off at the door. Can you see me? Where are we? He cuts him off at the door. The other teacher just used to let him go, and he'd walk out of the school, grabs him by the collar, lifts him up, and this was the school devil, right? I mean, you were terrified of him. His toes are just on the floor. Somebody else looked out the door, was sitting in the front. He said, he's dragging him to the office with his toes barely touching the floor. Mr. Murphy was tough. And we were convinced if you crossed him, he'd kill you, right? I mean, he would get us good. We were all terrified of Mr. He was a math teacher, a nice guy, right? He goes down and he spits on Mr. Murphy, and he hits him right in the bald spot. A perfect spit. And I was leaning like this against the half rail, talking to somebody else. The other person was facing me. I'm the only one who saw it. I'll tell you how terrified I was, Mr. Murphy. I didn't do anything. I ran. He went like this. He spit, and then he ran, and he hid in the one place that he was pretty sure Mr. Murphy wouldn't catch him and kill him. Where did he hide? Where did he hide? Say it. Push it down.
Girls' locker room.
The girls' bathroom, that's right. He hid in the girls' bathroom. That's how afraid he was. Later, he comes up to me, and again, he threatens me when we had this fight 2 years ago. He said, you got to tell everybody I spit on Mr. Murphy. Right? I was so afraid, I ran into the nearest classroom, and we used to have, and I'm going to stand up again, we used to have snow in Rochester where I grew up, lots of snow. It's white stuff that comes out of the sky. I know you people watch television. I know people from Houston don't know what it is, right? used to wear galoshes, boots over your shoes. I know it sounds weird to you, but anyway. So, as I tell people, why'd you move down there? It's so hot. I said, you don't have to shovel the heat or the humidity, right? And they used to so on the wall they put hooks and a little shelf on the bottom for your boots, for your galoshes, and like a half door. So if you stood in there, right, you could see from here up and you could see from your knees down. I ran in there, I ducked, and then I put my feet up on the galoshes shelf so I couldn't be seen, right? Because I figured Mr. Murphy would take out his rage. I mean, he came charging up those stairs, ready to do something awful. And even at the risk, rather than coming to me and telling me, hey, shut up, don't tell anybody, he had to tell his buddies he was the one with the guts to spit on Mr. Murphy. Toughest kid in school wouldn't spit on Mr. Murphy, right? He was a monster. So sometimes there's nothing you can do. There's nothing Mr. Murphy could do for his esteem needs except try to find him and turn him upside down. That's just how it is. So you can't do it all. Okay? You can't do it all. Esteem. You want me to tell you how to destroy, if you're a female teacher, how to destroy a 7th grader's esteem among his peers? Oh, you're such a nice boy. Oh, it's so good. I'm so glad to have you in class. Teacher did that to me once. I barely made it to the next class alive. What'd you do, kiss her? What are you going to do? I remember her name was her first name was Virginia. Kids used to come up before weeks. Ginny, Ginny, right? That's what they do. She would sign, right? We saw she would sign some of her stuff, Ginny, right? I mean, it was just horrifying to me, right? Because we're tough guys now, you know. We're 13, however old we were. We're, you know, that kind of stuff. It wasn't just the guys with a slick back hair who had that feeling. It's just so you have to be careful about this stuff. You have to be very, very careful. Okay? You also have to be aware of what brings esteem and doesn't bring esteem. Okay, and that can be by cultural group, and that can be by what's going, et cetera, by other things that people come from. So, for instance, somebody once said to me, you know, it's very interesting. You don't mind losing an athletic contest to a girl. Years later, I realized, yeah, that was true. But boy, I remember we were where the top 3 grades in the class were girls. Oh boy, that was rough for us. Because in the subculture I come from, right, Jewish subculture, being an athlete is good. Being an athlete is good, but being I told you, did I tell you about Arthur Stoller? Oh, I shouldn't have mentioned this last time. About Arthur, the school's best athlete. He was the best athlete, and he reached puberty when he was 13, had a beard when he was 13 or 14. We used to say, Artur is mature, right? That was how we used to tease him, right? The girls all loved him. He was all county, maybe all state in basketball, football, and baseball. I remember one time we're playing intramurals, so we're playing in the gym, and he was about this much taller than I was, right? So he played in the intramural team too, and he comes charging straight at the basket, and I realized I got position on him. So I just stayed there. I stood there, and he comes in, and it was a charge. I was so brave. He hits me, and I go flying. You know, remember in the old gyms, the stage is in the back, and I go flying into the bottom of the stage. But I caught him right here with the top of my head. And he gets a little bleeding, and the coach comes, and I'm sitting there like this, right? At the back, he goes, Arthur, are you okay? Because he went down too. No, he didn't go. He was up there. Arthur, you okay? Because he seen the blood. And I'm lying on the floor. Big deal for me, right? This is my star athlete. In the end, some idiot jumped on his leg 5 seconds after the whistle in football, and he heard it, and he was never the same. But he came to me later and said, you know, I was jealous of you in high school. I said, what? You were jealous of me? He said, yeah, because academics came easy to you. I had to study and study and study. And so, you know, that had to do a lot with, you know, the kind of values we all heard at home. Don't worry, he went into business. He's doing fine. But I saw him years later. But in any case, you have to be careful about these things, about what brings esteem and what doesn't. And, you know, we often talk about the fact that the values that the schools have are often not the values that the kids have, and that can make it difficult. It can even make it difficult for kids who have different values. So, nonetheless, you got to try hard to be sure that kids' esteem is that you set up a classroom, and that's particularly true in elementary school. And I know most people take this course want to be elementary school teachers, where the teacher really is seen as the person. Okay, now, I'm going to tell you one other thing about this before I go into self-actualizing needs. Many of the humanists do not agree with Maslow. Let's go back to the PowerPoint, so we can get my face in there. They don't agree with Maslow that this is a hierarchy, and that if someone is here, that this doesn't matter. Someone has a safety needs. Many of them say all these needs are functioning all the time. You have to worry constantly about self-actualizing kids. What does self-actualizing mean? I say this every class, don't bring the book or the list, because that would take, you know, we'd have to extend the class another month to talk about it. Once you get a healthy person whose needs have been met, all these needs have to be met, you get self-actualizing needs, says Maslow. But other humanists, particularly Rogers and others who are Rogers in particular is very interested in education, right? Freedom to learn here. You ought to read this book. Let's go to the Freedom to Learn. You saw the article that I sent you that we gave to you, question I would ask myself if I were a teacher, by Rogers. Carl Rogers, Carl's with a C, isn't it? I think so, yeah. By Carl Rogers. And you'll notice in that article, he talks about the kid's own interests. Remember, he talks about moths and how it never occurred to him that his overwhelming interest in moths would be something, okay, come back to me, would be something that the school cared about. Now, you know, you have to say it's a little weird for a kid to be interested in moths. Well, no more weird than being interested in taking a ball and hitting it with a stick. Or no more weird than being interested in some offbeat kind of music. And you have to, and Rogers is saying, don't say, well, that kid's at a different stage, we'll wait until later. They're saying the people's needs, who they are and what they are, ought to drive the curriculum, what interests them. I had when I first started teaching, I still regret it to this day. I had a kid who, did I tell you the story about the kid who built the Indian village out of popsicle sticks? I don't know, it doesn't matter. This kid, this was the same kid. It was like out of a grade B movie about Italians in New York. This was in New York City. I lived in New York City for a few years. And he was from Italian background, and his grandpa used to take him to the opera. And one day you'd sit in class, and we're talking about this. I remember New York State history. I taught that for a few years, New York State history, and we're talking about the battles, what happened to the various Indian tribes, and who they sided with in the Revolutionary War. All of a sudden, apropos of nothing, here in the back of the room, "Oh, sola mia!" And it's Joey. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I was just thinking about an opera I went to." He loved opera. This was the day before earphones. And one day I sit there, and he's like this. He's in class like this. And I saw he had a record player on the floor playing opera, very low, and he's trying to listen to it, right? I was a dope. I should have taken that opera and used it because this was a school for kids who were having, probably they have all kinds of labels on them today. But this was in the early 60s. You know, this was an in. One kid, this was an in for his learning. One kid loved airplanes. He had a very difficult time reading. And this was my first job as a teacher, my second one, but I really hadn't had very much teaching experience. And he comes, he says, "I want to read this book about airplanes." So I looked at it. It was a hard book. Something hit me. I said, okay. He didn't want to read any other book. He wanted to read the book about the airplanes. And his reading got better. He went through it. He tried hard. But he read. It wasn't a miracle, but he read. Because this is what interested him. This is where he was coming from. This idea that I know what everyone has to learn. Don't you understand that what we teach is arbitrary anyway? When the school picks a novel for the kids to read, or right, it's one of thousands and thousands of novels that you could pick that are good novels. I remember my son once, and one of the things that we do in school today, and then we get kids with all kinds of labels, are faster, 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 faster. That's the IQ thing. Oh, if you read this book, which is a 6th grade book, in 2nd grade, you're a genius. So my son is in 7th grade, and they assign The Good Earth to read. The kids hated it. That's an adult novel. You start in high school. And he just hated reading. I once said, "Why do you read?" He said, I can read what they make me read. He just hated it. When the Board of Education decided, we're going to put our 7th graders on high school novels, and the kids didn't get it, didn't go. Fortunately, it was a parochial school, and this is how I got around it. I called up the principal of the school, happened to be a rabbi. I said, "Rabbi, let me read you something." And at the beginning of the book, there's a sex scene where the guy is fixed up with this woman, and he marries her, and they have like a scene about, the sex scene. It takes place in China, right? It's a story about China and the deterioration of Chinese society at the beginning of the 20th century, and right? She was very concerned with China. And I hear him on the phone. He says, "Stop! Stop! What are you reading me?" I said, "This is the book you assigned my kid." Right? And I could hear this pause at the end. And, he's got a job, and there's the board. I knew darn well he didn't pick it. So he said, "Okay, I'll let the teacher pick another book for him." So the teacher, who knew what she was doing, unlike the doctors and the accountants on the board, right? And the business owners on the board, or whatever they did, or the person who works for a department store, she knew what she was doing. And she gave him the Jungle Book. You know the Jungle Book? Like, you know, Ricky Tikki Tavi and all that stuff. He loved it. He loved it. It was the right book for him. You know, and the pants, the animals who talk and all that stuff. But it's not a little kid's book. It's meant, you know, it's in, he wrote it, Kipling wrote it for adults, but it's at a much easier level. Anyway, she found something you wanted to read. So you need to keep that in mind all the time. You also need to keep in mind, let's go to Maslow. Okay, I assigned some articles, what Maslow tells us about self-actualizing people. Self-actualizing people, he calls these have being needs. It's not deprivation of what other people haven't given to me, but needs of whom I'm actually meant to be, my own intellectual and aesthetic needs. Okay? It's not an accident that when I was just talking about Kohlberg, about Stage 3, that I picked the Jet song. I love Broadway musicals. I love them. Up until maybe Fiddler on the Roof. Then all this new stuff I don't like. I can't help it. I have to tell you, I went to see Cats. I almost cried. I hated it so much. Then Tony Randall, just before he died, he came and he gave a talk on Channel 8, which I usually don't watch, but I was watching it at that time. And he, because it was Tony Randall, and he said, Cats. He said, blah, 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 blah. I said, oh, if Tony Randall doesn't like it. Right? 'Cause he's one of these guys who wants American theater, except for that last song. I remember I saw the last song and this cat going up to heaven. I said, who is this cat? I don't know what's going on. I didn't like it. But anyway, the old-time musicals, Oklahoma, where the wind comes sweeping down the plain, could have danced all night, right? This kind of stuff. I like that stuff. You should listen to the music from West Side Story. Boy, that's the pinnacle of American theater. Anyway, so this is where your own needs, what you like, your aesthetic needs, and your own intellectual needs, things that interest you. To this day, I still get 2 American history magazines and a bunch of stuff about American politics, which have historical books. I like American history. I didn't go into it as a field in the end. In the end, I went someplace else. But I always liked it. Right? You have to understand. Anybody ever watch a sports show? Talk sports show? Who watches the sports shows? These guys, they know everything. It's not just the middle of, man, what a great hit. They figure averages. There are all kinds of formulas for figuring out how good players are. One of the people on our faculty actually concocted a formula for predicting the success of college football players and how good they'll be when they're pros. Yeah, go ahead.
The reason why they know so much is because they were pro athletes before.
Yeah, they were pro athletes. That's exactly right. But it's not just, oh, I'm big and tough. That's what it intellectually interests them, right? By the way, that's one reason that they are good pro athletes, because they think about the game. It's not just enough to be, we'll talk about that when we get to the end of Kohlberg. It's not just enough to be skilled. You have to be able to think about these things. But it interests them, right? Not all of them were pro athletes, by the way. Push it down? You can say it?
But majority of them
were. A lot of them were. And that's how they came to know. But they're really intellectually interested in this stuff, right? It gets beyond me. George Will, who's a columnist of political stuff, he loves baseball, the technical end. He shows all kinds of. He wrote a book about, computer printouts about baseball and which pitcher should pitch against which batter and where you place them and the computer stuff that they do. This is one of the amazing things about it. As I'm doing this, Phil Garner is the manager of the Astros. I don't know if he still will be that time sober. But one of the things is he's still a seat-of-the-pants manager. He doesn't use computer printouts. And I saw that stuff that George Will printed. He's a famous political columnist. I couldn't understand it. It's obviously a deep intellectual interest of his. People are intellectually interested in all kinds of things, right? Aesthetically interested in all kinds of things, right? And you have to be ready to expand. I have to admit something awful to you now, right? 97.1 Country Greats. I like that station. Right? Now, I admit I'm easing into it because a lot of those are crossover songs, you know, right, that made the standard thing, you know, Willie Nelson and stuff like that. But it never occurred to me in 5 million years that I would like country music. You know, I'm not a... But I've lived here for a long time, and something happened to me, right? Something good. I tell people I used to be a Yankee, but I got over it, right? So, you know, so it's interesting, you know, and I really like this stuff. Today on the way here, I listened to a song I'd never heard before. I really liked it. You know, I'm starting to get into it. I don't know. It's good stuff. And who knows why? Who knows why? But these are things that people should follow. Aesthetic needs, intellectual needs. Self-actualizing people, this is what they pursue, what interests them. Okay? What interests them. Okay? And they have things that pursue them too, right? Self-actualizing people, see if you get my picture in there? Self-actualizing people, thanks. They have, if these needs are met, you're going to find the picture of mental health here. Okay? So Maslow was going to tell you, if your love and belongingness needs are not met, there's going to be a sickness here. We didn't do this, right? That you're not going to see in self-actualizing people. Here, let's go to the overhead, sorry. If you have this overwhelming need to be loved and it's not satisfied, what are you going to get? Okay? Does anybody know what this word means? I believe it's also from Greek mythology. A sycophant. All right, I'm not going to write it down, but the best definition is a butt kisser. Okay? A sycophant is someone who's, oh, you're wonderful. Oh, right. Groupies are sycophants. Right? Oh, you're the best. This is how people, they're getting a sense of belongingness and to some extent esteem from latching on to great and famous personalities, right? A great singer or a great baseball player, right? Maslow says it can also go the other way. If your belongingness needs are not met, you can completely isolate yourself from the rest of the world. Does anybody know what we call? We already talked about that. This is how he explains a schizoid personality. Didn't we talk about this schizoid already? Someone who just says, I don't belong anywhere, I don't want anything to do with anyone. That's what a schizoid personality is. Or the sociologists, again, call it alienation. I don't care. Okay? If we go to esteem needs, okay? If we go to esteem needs, okay, one of the outstanding characteristics, Maslow says, of people whose esteem needs are not met is a lust for power. Power. Okay? If you have a lack of esteem needs, let me get rid of this. A lack of esteem means you have this need for power. Okay? What kind of person have this overwhelming need to have 100,000 people in a square going, Heil Hitler? There's something wrong with that Hitler guy. Right? And by the way, he didn't want to be contradicted ever. He didn't want to do anything. Some people say that one of the reasons that the D-Day invasion of Normandy succeeded so well is that they had panzer divisions that some people say could have thrown back at least the invasion at Omaha Beach. But Hitler was sleeping and he didn't want to be disturbed. Right? And by the time he got up, it was too late. I mean, not everybody agrees with that, but he was the most powerful. He had to be the best. And there's another way, right, to get your esteem needs met. Okay? They asked a soldier, okay? I'm going to use a bad word, it's a quote. After the Civil War, why did you fight for the South? I don't get it. You're poor, you're miserable. And this guy knew himself. He said, because I may be poor, I may be miserable, I may have nothing from this society, but as long as this society stays here, at least I ain't a nigger. Right? By definition, he understood, and he was using that word on purpose to show I'm better than they are. As long as this society stays in place, at least I'm not one of them. I'm better than they are. Right? That's a sickness. That's what bigotry is to Maslow. My esteem needs haven't been met. There's something so wrong with me that if I can put somebody else down, and Hitler did that too. The Jews are the Jews are human vermin, and the Slavs are what we call Untermenschen. You know, Unter is lower, under people, right? I can go and conquer them. He had a lot of trouble with England. He had a lot of trouble. I don't know if you know this, but he, you know, the British he considered Anglo-Saxons. They're Germans, right? And he actually contacted the English to say, I'll rule Europe, and you through the British Empire rule the rest of the world, and Germanic people will rule them. And by the way, Churchill knew that very well. You know what Churchill used to call him on his broadcast? During World War I, Churchill was a captain in the British Army, and Hitler was a corporal. Churchill was an officer, right? He used to call him the corporal. Oh, here's the corporal again. He knew what he was doing. He was getting at it. He realized this man had an overwhelming need for esteem, and he was putting him down by calling him the corporal. There's nothing Hitler could say back, because Churchill was an officer, right? He had been an officer. It wasn't anymore, obviously. He had been an officer. That's a sickness. That's a sickness. Bigotry is a sickness that comes, Maslow would say, from lack of esteem needs. It's interesting that that Civil War soldier understood very well his position. He felt that he was a nobody. But he was desperate for a society that would say to him, by the virtue of what you look like, by the virtue of the fact that you're white, as long as we keep this society in place, you're better than they are. Or at least everybody thinks you're better than they are. Right? And it becomes important, particularly when you know it's not true. I mean, I remember I read this article years ago. The guy was an obvious quote-unquote loser. Right? I mean, he saw, I don't know if people are aware of this, but many of plantations were run by slaves. Okay? Households on the plantation, what they called the house slave, they ran the whole thing. Right? Freed blacks often did very well in the South. Right? They would hide. If anybody saw Roots, there's the person who plays Chicken George, who eventually, because he's brilliant at training fighting chickens, buys his way out of slavery. You'll notice that Alex Haley, who's his descendant, right, it came from a line of people who did very well. I actually studied with one woman from Virginia who was a descendant of, you know, people of great talent who were a person who was talented and brought his way out of slavery, and he was determined. She was from a very wealthy background in Virginia, very successful. She said, we just had to hide so you don't get too uppity, quote unquote. What does uppity mean? What does uppity mean? You're showing me up. You're attacking my self-esteem. That's what it means. So Maslow says, let's go back to the PowerPoint. I'm sorry for jumping all over the place. People who have had all these needs met, they're not desperate to steal things. They have a sense of safety. They're not out. They don't feel people are out to get them. They have a feeling of belonging. And a place where they can, okay, they don't need to put other people down because they don't belong to my group. They don't need to put other people down to get their esteem. Okay? They have a sense of who they are and what they are. Let me say one thing. You get my picture in the corner. With love and belongingness needs here, some people have said that love and belongingness needs are the key, right over, where's my arrow? There it is. Are the key to creativity. Once you feel that, if you feel that if you're going to try and fail, that people will say, we don't want you, forget it, okay? I don't want anything to do with you, then they become terrified to try something new because they won't belong. And if they feel they belong at any price, at any price, it doesn't matter, I belong, I'll still be accepted. Whoops, sorry. I'll still be accepted, then they're ready to try. Einstein once said, Einstein's formulations basically went to overthrow the world of physics, what they understood. He basically said, Newtonian physics, we can't look at the world like that way anymore. Okay, come back to me if you can. He once said, if my formulas prove to be correct, if my theory proves to be correct, Germany will say I'm a German, and France will say I'm a citizen of the world. They'll all want me to belong. If my theory proves incorrect, France will say I'm a German, and Germany will say I'm a Jew. And what do the Jews say? He was saying nothing. He said, here's a place I feel where I belong, that I'll be accepted no matter what. And by the way, he wasn't particularly religious. He did identify as a member of the Jewish community, but he had a sense of, this is where I belong, and if I take a risk, there'll still be some people who will accept me. And by the way, that's extremely important in your classrooms, to tell people you're accepted no matter what. This is what Rogers calls trust. You can trust me. I'm not gonna say, this is what unconditional love is. You've heard this stuff? That all comes from this theory. You're okay. If you make a mistake, don't worry about it. We'll work on it. That's why you're so never going to say, you're a bad boy. I don't like what you did, but you're okay, or you're a bad girl. I accept you. Not that my acceptance of you depends on your behavior. So people, let's go back here again, I'm sorry. So people who are self-actualizing, they accept people for who they are. They don't have bigotries and prejudice. They have what Maslow calls a democratic character structure. They don't need to prove who they are. I once know a guy, there was one academic magazine in Israel published in Hebrew. Okay? Because most academics, they want their stuff around the world published in English because that's the language of academia. And this guy, there's one in Israel published in Hebrew for issues that wouldn't be of concern to anyone except in Israel. This was in the 70s, right? So it was published in Hebrew, and he accepted an article. Then he found out that the person who wrote it didn't have his doctorate. He wouldn't publish it. So my professor goes to him, so what's the matter with you? He said, it's the same guy. What do you care? He said, no, I'm not going to be the editor of a journal that publishes stuff that doesn't have. That's his own esteem. They're going to know whoever publishes my journal, they all have doctorates. Okay? They have a democratic character structure. Maslow would say, when I go to work in the morning, I hope to learn from my students, from my colleagues, and from the person who washes the floors. Okay, come back to me now for a while. Thanks. And people who knew him said it was the truth. He didn't have any hang-ups about who he could learn, from whom he could learn, and what he could learn. People say he would often see him conversing with the workers around the campus. He was a professor at Brandeis, I think. And then coming and talking to other people about ideas he got from them. And appreciating their skills that he didn't have. Okay? There's a sense, a fresh sense of appreciation of other people and of the world. Okay, I'll give you an example of this. Has anybody ever lived on a west coast where you could see the sun setting into the water? Does anybody ever see the sun setting? It looks like it sets into the way. You've seen it? Yeah, a few people have seen it. You've seen it? Boy, it's beautiful. Woo! It sinks. You see the sun looks like it's sinking into the ocean, and it looks like the ocean is extinguishing it, right? And there's less light. And then there's, if you get a good day with clouds, all different kinds of colors go into the clouds. And it's magnificent. Well, in Israel for a while, I lived for a year, maybe a couple of years, in a small farming community, right in a kibbutz, right on the west coast of Israel, up on a hill, right? So you had a view up on a hill. First time I saw that, I went, oh, wow, right? And then wow again. In Israel, it never rains in the summer, so day after day you can go out and look. Oh, well, after a while, you know, you've seen it 50 times, 100 times, 200 times. It's enough, right? So one day we had a people called work-study group, right? People who are coming to work and study for a year on this kibbutz. They had, communal labor at that time anyway. Some still do. And they were a group of college students, and they came for a year to work and to study. They had a good study program set up. And since it was a communal kind of living, in those days, people ate in a communal dining hall, right? They had your own small kitchen, but most people. So the students were there, and it was the first day, and we're going, and I'm walking with one of them, and I'm talking to her as we're going for supper. They'd come, and I'd show them their stuff, and whether they go, I was sort of like I wasn't one of the teachers, I was sort of like their nanny. I don't know. I'd take care of all their other needs. And we're walking there, and I'm walking to the dining hall, and I'm talking to her, so she's not there. I remember she was from Ohio. She'd never in the Midwest, right? And all of a sudden, I go back, and she's there like this, looking at the sunset. Well, Maslow says, self-actualizing people don't get the way I was. They have this constant sense of appreciation of things every day. It happens to you once in a while. You walk outside, like on a day like this, I know I'm not supposed to date it, but this is Houston, so everybody knows it's hot a lot, right? It's cool today. Everybody walk out and say, wow, look at the trees. It feels beautiful. And you could look for a little while because you can get outside and say, I'm going to die if I don't get into that air-conditioned car in 12 seconds, right? You just, it's beautiful. And you just have an appreciation. One day I went home, and I came in, and the sun hadn't quite set, and I looked, and I got home earlier than most people do. There was no one on the street. And all of a sudden I heard the birds and saw the squirrels, and it was just, wow. As I said, self-actualizing people wow all the time. They wow all the time at ideas. Good teachers are constantly impressed by the wonderful things their children do. Oh, I've seen a sixth grader get this, or a second grader. Yeah, I've seen it 20 times already. I'm on my 6th year of teaching, and every year 3, 4 kids get it, right? No, it's wonderful when each kid gets it. It's wonderful when you get a new picture from a kid's thought of a new idea. There's a sense of appreciation for people. There's a sense of appreciating each person as an individual, right? That includes the person's culture. This semester, for some reason, I'm on a tirade about multiculturalism. But also appreciating each person as an individual, having no bigotries or prejudices. Maslow says it in one of his books, the only prejudices that self-actualizing people have are against prejudiced people. No, he said, their sense of humor is never at the expense of another person. Ethnic jokes, those are awful things. Polish jokes they're evil, right? Jokes attacking other ethnic groups, blacks and they're evil. They're terrible things. Yeah, go ahead.
So in Maslow's theory, we can actually revert back to a needs before and then have to get back?
Okay, we'll get to that in a second. What he says is, and he says the only person they ever tell a joke is at their own expense, right? Never at the expense of another. They're not perfect. I wrote one article on Maslow, and it came from this. I wrote it with one of my person who was one of my doctoral students at the time. She had a friend who was an engineer, and so he tells the head of the engineering society calls her. He said, "I want the head of the engineering to call you." He said, "My older engineers are my best engineers, but they're a pain in the neck." That's not the part of the anatomy he used, but we're on television, right? They're a pain in the neck, he said. I guess I go. He said they're a pain in the butt. That's what he said. Why? And he gave this example. The guy is in the laboratory, one of his top engineers is in the laboratory solving a problem. And they have a government grant. And the head of the government granting agency is there to oversee the project. So he calls him in his laboratory to come up and meet him. And he said, "I don't have time to come and backslap some bureaucrat. I'm working on something," slam the phone down. Right? So what he was saying is, self-actualizing people are very problem-centered. They're intense on what they do. Okay? This guy was solving a problem. And he said they don't have time for superficial relationships, and also it's not very nice sometimes. Maslow says they don't have too many friends, but they're intense about their friendships. People said that described Maslow's personality. He said the same thing about self-actualizing love. Right? From everyone who knew him, he had a wonderful relationship with his wife. They were married for years and years. They got along great. There was something, they both were really intensely in love with each other. And they said, so his description of a self-actualizing love was his relationship with his wife. He said, it's not a dependence or a need, right? Oh, I belong, right? Oh, I married the cheerleader. Or there's some, in the old thing, fortunately that's gone, but in the old days, people used to take their identity, a lot of women, I'm Mrs. John Jones. And then they either get divorced or John Jones dies, and now who is she, right? That's a belongingness need right there. No, he said each one is his or her own person in his marriage. This is how he described his marriage. Each of us is his or her own person, and yet we come together and we give to each other. We can't imagine living without each other, but we're not satisfying each other's deprivation needs. There's an intense, there's a love, and he shows you about sexual behavior going through the stages. Okay, let's go back to this for a second here. Sexual needs is a physiological need. That one's probably obvious. Sexual needs and by the way, it's not only that. One of the complaints of the early feminist movement was there were many societies where if you didn't get married, you couldn't live. Your man had to do it for you, right? For women, right? Women couldn't get decent jobs, etc. It wasn't never quite as bad here, but it was bad. Physical safety, right? That was another complaint, that you needed to have a man to protect you from other men. Consistency and predictability. Some people get married because they hate the dating scene and they don't know what's going to be. Now we're married, everything's consistent, predictable. Okay? Love and belongingness needs. I know that doesn't or won't apply to anyone here, but gee, everybody in my group of buddies is getting married. Maybe it's my turn to get married. What's going on here? Esteem needs. Now, I am sure that this applies to no one who's taking this class, but hey, I dated the cheerleader. Hey, I'm dating the captain of the football team. I remember one of the guys on my group, I guess we'd be called nerds today. Not quite, but we were just every. He got a date with a cheerleader. I thought we were going to die. I mean, they were 5,000 levels above us. So he goes out with her. I don't know how it happened. Maybe their mothers arranged it. I don't know. He goes out with her. I said, how? And we asked him, how was it? How was it? He didn't like her too much. He didn't like him. You know, it just wasn't his thing, right? 2 weeks later, he's out with her again. He said, what happened? I thought you didn't like her. He said, I have a date with a head cheerleader. What are you, nuts? Or with one of the cheerleaders? Of course I'm going to go out with her. In the end, I think she dumped him. But, esteem. Oh. Right? By the way, this is very interesting. This has, in traditional American society, this esteem over mating, who you're allowed to marry, is very interesting. Okay? Men, let me tell you a story. Come back to me for a second. This is my professor. There's the head of the company hires a new secretary. And the new secretary turns out to be very efficient. And then they get a big contract, and there's a lot of pressure to fulfill it. So the secretary is staying late constantly at work. And eventually the head of the company takes the secretary out. They have a few drinks. And before you know it, they fall in love and get married. The other company's a woman and the secretary's a man. How many people sort of inside jerk like this a little, right? Even to this day, it sounds strange. Men, in general, marry at their level or below, right? So if you think of the head of the company and he marries the secretary, right? Or he walks into the department store and meets a sales guy, asks on a date and marries her, that's okay. But the university professor or the head of the company who's a woman and walks in and marries the janitor, to this day, there's something about esteem. So my advice to you, right, if you're a woman not getting married, is drop out immediately. Because if you get a college degree, that puts you up higher on the esteem scale. All the guys who don't have college degrees are out for you, right? I'm warning you, right? Get another degree, it's even worse. So as women go up the prestige ladder, the number of mates gets less and less for them. As men go up the prestige ladder, it gets more and more. Okay, so is something going on here? Okay. So that's a matter of prestige. There's something going on with one of the monitors here. Don't worry, I'll try to ignore it. So that's breaking down a little now in our society, but it can be someone just came and turned it off, right? High-tech maneuver. Okay, so Maslow's going to say self-actualizing people don't care about that. Are you the person for me? I don't care how much you make or how many degrees you have. Okay, there's a democratic character structure. There's a cherishing of each human being as an individual, right? Unless you're right. And in the end, all the bigotry and the hate and the upsets go away. there's an appreciation for life. There's an appreciation for knowledge. In one of the articles I gave you, you talked about peak experiences. I had one peak experience that I remember, and I was young, right? I was in my 30s, and I was doing my master's degree, and I was sitting in the basement of a library doing something on programmed learning. This is where, based on Skinner's kind of stuff, where you learn one thing and then the next and the next, little step by 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 little step, right? How do you spell mountain? Mountain is spelled M-O-U-N-T-A-I-N. Then the next one, how do you spell mountain? M-O-U-N-T blank blank N. If 90% of the people couldn't get that next one right, he would go back and do it. M-O-U-N-T-A blank N, right? Until you got it right. Step by step by step. People who saw it, and it was quote unquote successful, but most people said it was boring. Then they took these programs, they scrambled the frames together. They scrambled them, instead of just putting it in order, they just scrambled them random order. People made a lot of mistakes inside it, but they learned anyway. They learned the material in the end, they learned well. When they would scramble two different programs together, people got confused. All of a sudden it hit me that this was the proof of Piaget's theory, of holism. You get the facts coming in. It doesn't matter if they're in, you understand it. If you get, I can't go into it now, but it hit me. I got it. I understand it. I see it all. I was taking courses from various professors. This is when I became the Piaget. I was just delightful. And I ran up the stairs of the library, and I skipped around the building for a little while. I looked at my watch. It was 20 minutes, between 20 and 25 minutes, that I was skipping around the library in delight. And I had it. And I started to write it down, and I couldn't get the beauty of what I knew down on paper. I gave the report in class, and I just couldn't convey the wonder of it to my fellow students, right? It was just something magnificent. I had an insight that was just so wonderful. And I said, and Matt was talking about time collapsing. I thought it was a couple of minutes. It was 20 minutes of ecstasy, intellectual ecstasy, right? He said, self-actualizing people have that all the time. Run intellectual things, right? Things about the wow experience with the sun, with the sunset, but also seeing things and understanding things. He talks about, let's look over here, again, back to the PowerPoint. He said, these people have grumbles. Where's my food? How come nothing is ever where it should be? How come nobody loves me? How come I'm not elected president? He said, it's not Maslow, but Maslow's followers talk about self-actualizing people having meta-grumbles. Why can't I accomplish what I was meant to accomplish? Why isn't the world a better place? I'm working on a problem that's meaningful. Why can't I get to where I can have a real solution to it? Why can't I concentrate on what's important in life? Oops, come back to me now. Is it most important to get the big grant, or is it most important to do research that'll really make a difference? I'm not going to give you the answer about what the university administration is. Go ask the deans of the various colleges and see what they say. I think you might be surprised at what some of them say, right? So ultimately, there's a feeling, once again, that we saw from Erickson, that I have a responsibility to humanity. Remember at Erickson's top stage? Also this idea that I identify with all humankind. And this responsibility from humanity can go from designing a better bridge so that people can go across it, to helping that one kid learn how to read. I have a and I need to do things. And I need, as a teacher, as an educator, as a human being, to worry about all these needs for all our kids. Okay, one of the great disagreements, it's not a disagreement, but a very big difference in emphasis, maybe it is a disagreement that Rogers has with Maslow, is that people are unique individuals. That's just how it is. We talk about collecting things, right? People are weird. Everybody's weird. I mean, I can't imagine what people see in watching cars going round and round and round and round. We have somebody on our faculty who every year goes on the trail ride. The closest I ever came to being killed by a fellow faculty member was when I said, I went to the rodeo. And by the way, I went to rodeos when I was a kid too. County fairs up north, they have plenty of rodeos. I said, you go there, you wait around, some guy jumps out of a cow runs out, some guy comes out on a horse, jumps on the cow and ties it up. And then you wait another minute for another guy jumps on a cow and ties it up. And then you wait another 50, another guy jumps. I thought she was going to kill me. She loves the rodeo and the trail ride. Right? Fortunately, I told you, many years I used to be a farmer. So I like the livestock show. So that's what saved my life. Right? Otherwise, she was going to take out scissors and put it through my heart. I said, I like the livestock show. I like, particularly the turkeys. I used to raise turkeys for a while. So for a while, I don't know anymore. But when I first went to livestock shows, I used to understand what was going on. I could tell good turkeys from not such good turkeys. I still had a little bit of knowledge. So yeah, turkeys are fun. So they're very stupid, but you got to know what you're doing. I would look at the cows, and I couldn't tell. I never raised cows. I could never tell, which was a good one and how you look. But the turkeys, I could tell. The turkeys who won the prizes, I could tell why. Right? I liked it. How many people are thinking, will this turkey stop talking about turkeys, right? Who cares, right? People are different. People are different. And Carl Rogers is going to tell you that what you need to do is to take those kids' individual differences, like Joey's loving opera, and some other person liking this, and some other person liking that, and use them for your education. I'm going to tell you about the popsicle sticks. When I first got my teaching degree, I did it in a way that other people. I had a degree in history, and then I decided I want to be a teacher, so I went and I took extra education courses. Okay? And one of the things we had to do, and I didn't have to student teach, because that time the rule was that if you had a job teaching in a school already, a private school, that could substitute for your student teaching. And they get a report from the principal of the school, always said, hey, he's okay, unless they wanted to fire you, right? So, but we had to go and observe other things. And I'm observing a kindergarten, which was supposedly run on what they call open education, humanistic principles. This was in the 60s. Anybody know the Simon and Garfunkel song, Feelin' Groovy, da-da-da-da-da-da? Groovy means it's great, right? It's great, it's groovy, it's good stuff. Boy, am I old. So there's a kid, he's sitting there, and he's staring out the window. Remember the schools that we were in a second floor, like they had a second floor of a building. And he's staring out the window and staring out the window. Finally, I went to the teacher, I said, 20 minutes? I said, what's he doing? How come he's not doing anything? She said, oh, he's grooving on the world, right? Grooving means this is great, right? He's grooving. I'm just grooving. Everything's great. That's not open education. That's baloney. One time, the same kid, the opera kid, Joey, right? He says to me, Mr. Lieberman, I gave him to write a report, and he had trouble writing. Right? I mean, he wasn't illiterate, but it was hard for him to write. This was in the 7th grade. On the Iroquois Indians, right? Those were the big Indians. They were very important Indians. They actually helped the British. They sided with the British in the French and Indian Wars, and one of the reasons the British won in New York State, defeated the French. And eventually they've sided with the British in the American Revolution, too, and Washington attacked them, and they started rough times. But they were very important. Okay, and they actually had a very strong political organization. There were 5, later 6 tribes that came together. So we were studying about them, and he said, I wanna do an arts and crafts project. I said, okay, let's go I'll show you his arts and crafts projects. Let's go here. It's very easy to show, right? This is what he did. He said, let me do an arts and craft project, please. He drew 3 triangles. This is the smoke coming out. That's an arts and craft project, right? Well, first of all, the Iroquois Indian lived in the forests in western New York. They didn't live in tents, right? The Plains Indians lives in tents, right? Come back to me. Okay? This is junk. I said to him, Jerry, I don't think so. I don't think so. He said, okay, give me one more chance, one more chance, one more chance. I said, what are you going to do? He said, I'll build you an Iroquois village. I said, it can't be just something you throw together. He said, I'm going to really build Iroquois houses for you. I said, you got to know the stuff. He could read okay. He was just, all right. So he built me an Iroquois village out of popsicle sticks and toothpicks. The only thing he said, his mother asked me, she sent a note with him, and I said, okay, could she make, he was going to buy the little people, right? Little plastic people or rubber people, but could she make the clothes? Because it couldn't sew. I said, okay. But I said to her, he has to, I wrote the note, he has to tell you what to put on them. Okay? You can't do it. He has to tell you what to do. In those days, I don't know, maybe he couldn't buy popsicle sticks in box. He ate a lot of popsicles. He told me he loved it. Okay? He built it right. He built it from, he had the wooden houses and they were done right. He had the long house where they did the religious ceremonies. He built it right with a blanket. It looked like his mother sewed it, but it looked like a deer skin. I lifted it up, and inside is sitting a little doll. It was a woman. The Iroquois religious leaders were women. He had read it. He had little things built out of the Iroquois. They had horticulture, called horticulture. They could grow crops. What they would do, they didn't have metals, so they couldn't cut down, didn't have irons, they couldn't cut down trees. What they would do is they would take a stone, and very near the bottom of the tree, they would hack out slowly, right? The would slowly hack out a little hole, and they had a little fire in it. Now, light a fire inside of a tree, it's not too good for the tree, right? And then it would burn a little of the tree, and then they scrape it out and light a bigger fire until the tree died, and they'd push it over. Right? And so he showed, he had built little, I don't know how he did it, but little like stumps, right? Rows of stumps. That's exactly how the Iroquois did it. And in between the stumps, he had made out of toothpicks like corn. And he had women in there. That's right, the women did the farming and the men hunted. And he had men with bows and arrows in there. And he had the right animals in the forest. He bought those, right? He had cougars, pumas, right? They used to be on the East Coast. There's still a few left in West New York. There used to be, I don't know. And bears and all the other stuff. It was beautiful. I got dope, I threw it away. If you ever get a student do something wonderful like that, save it. When I went overseas, I said, I can't take this with me. I went to study in Israel, but I should have saved it, right? It was just wonderful. That was good. He showed he knew without writing. Right? So it's not just do whatever you want whenever you want. And in Freedom to Learn, Roger says you've got to tell people that there are standards. But in the end, people will want to do what they want to do. I have to tell you, I knew a kid who went to school like this. The Sudbury School in Massachusetts. It wasn't a kid, I knew someone who when he was a kid, went to school like this. We were graduate students together. He used to tell me I couldn't wait to get up in the morning and run to school to finish my projects, to do my projects. He said, I never had a formal math class for 3 years. He said, later when I think back on it, the teacher said, well, you want to do this, you got to learn this. He said, they taught me math through the project. He said, we never really had formal reading classes. You just learned how to read because you want to get something done, you had to read it. We would help each other with the reading. One day we're sitting and we're having a discussion after class or before class, I can't remember, took the same class, on the book of Job in the Bible. Next week he comes, I still have it. By the time I had learned a 12 or 13 page paper on his thoughts on the book of Job. And he told the professor, I got into an intellectual discussion with Lieberman, and I had to write this thing on Job. You're going to have to give me an extra week to do my paper for the class, right? So the professor said, okay, what's he going to do, right? He said, okay. I mean, the professor appreciated what was going on. There was just a sense of constant intellectual curiosity. This is the kind of thing, this is the kind of way that Rogers is really telling you to do schools. Let kids go off on their own. Let them follow their interests and pursue what they want to do. And you yourself need to try as hard as you can to function like a self-actualizing person. Maslow said he never saw a self-actualizing person younger than early 50s, so it's a little tough. But in the end, you're going to have to appreciate people's individual differences as individuals, not as a member of this group and that group. You're going to have to appreciate what interests people, what people want to do. You're also going to have to understand that there are family patterns, right, that make a difference. Families also can do this. My cousin married a guy who didn't want to go to college. You don't know what that was like in our family. She had a master's degree. This was one of my mother's sisters who family ran away from the convent. They ran all over the world. They were in Israel, right? She had a master's degree in teaching, English teaching. She was a teacher. This is my cousin, right? She married this guy. In our family, that was horrifying. My grandfather was a scholar. He wrote books, right? It was horrifying. How could it be? There was pressure for her not to marry him. Many of us, I'm convinced, went to college and did this stuff because of family pressure. What brings esteem? But he had a kind of a knack for business. If I say he has more money than all the rest of us put together, I may be exaggerating a little bit, but not much. And the truth is, it wasn't for the money. I really don't know how much money he has. He's a successful businessman, but he loved it. He had an instinct for it. He could smell a product and smell when to get out. He had this thing of pre-pop popcorn to sell to the theaters. I went to visit Israel. After a while, I'm there. I said, what happened to pre-pop popcorn? He said, the big chains are moving in. International chains are moving in. He said, I got to get out of it. Then he went into plastics, and then that moved in. It didn't matter to him. He just loved it. It was what he was doing, right? Even though there was a sense of in his esteem that this doesn't bring esteem. In the end, when he was making a lot more money, especially in those days, than her son, the professor, who was barely scraping by, right? My aunt gave in a little. But it's very interesting how these things are. You have to have an appreciation for each kid's ideas, each kid's knowledge, each kid's interests, even if it doesn't interest you. And you need to appreciate each person as an individual, and you need to constantly be examining yourself as an individual. What interests me, what I want to do. I ask my wife, she teaches, this is how you know I love my wife. She loves the book, The Count of Monte Cristo. I hated, after he breaks out of jail, I don't know if you read it, he gets put in jail, I hated every page. I hated every sentence. I got to the point where the word the I couldn't hate. And I got halfway through before I couldn't stand it anymore. I read page after page. She loves that book. So I said to her, she's in a private school, she can make some of her own choice. I said, why do you give these kids this book? I said, because I love it. And my sense of loving literature goes on to them. It's a book about vengeance, but it gets this typical French romanticism. It gets so complex. So many people you don't give a damn about after a while. I mean, you can see, I don't like that. I didn't like it. She loved it. That's a good reason to choose to do something, because it gives a sense of excitement about knowing and learning, and you can pass it on to the kids. But if a kid doesn't like it, let the kid read a different book. Let the kid do a different project. That thing about Joey and his popsicle sticks is because it's the best thing I ever did as a starting teacher, right? Take advantage of what kids can do well. This kid in the Sunday school, the teachers consider a pain in the neck, I caught on. I said, he's bright as can be, right? And we have 3 or 4 teachers, and go from text, several, and only one other teacher realized that. A couple other teachers who have him for a special, they didn't realize that. I said, he's really smart. And afterwards, they said, you're right. I test him. Look for kids' strengths. Look for what they can do. Don't listen to all the stupid labels that are put on kids. My wife refuses to look at records. I don't want to hear about labels. She had a kid who won a poetry contest. The principal comes into her, and this is the good principal. The one I told you who said, it's okay, never mind about the... Did I tell you about this? About how... Yeah, I told you about that. He said, who wrote this for him? She said, nobody. So, well, do you realize that he's learning disabled and he's this and he's that? She said, no. He did it himself. By not listening, by letting him write poems about what he wanted, and by going toward his strengths. This is what positive reinforcement, everybody knows this. By not listening to the labels, he won the contest. He loved her. He's still in contact with her. He must be in his 30s now. So these are the kind of things you need to remember. Next time, we're going to finish Kohlberg's theory. We're going to see a lot of the same lessons. But we're going to talk about, instead of through concepts of love and caring, which this was, we're going to talk about through conceptions of justice. And what does a just classroom look like? And what does it mean to be a just person? And what does it mean to act justly toward other people, including your own students? Okay, see you next week, and that'll be it.